After one night of rain, half the county lost their soil. You don't see it happen, not really. You hear the rain first, heavy, steady, relentless. It drums against the roof, fills the gutters, turns the dirt roads into slick ribbons of mud. You lie there listening, thinking about moisture, about yield, about how good this might be for the crop. But out in the fields, something else is happening. The first drops hit the ground like tiny explosions. A single raindrop doesn't look like much, but when it falls from the sky at terminal velocity, it carries force. Enough to break apart the surface of the soil. One drop dislodges one grain, then another, and those grains don't stay where they were. They join the water. The water begins to move. You've driven these hills 1,000 times. You know every slope, every contour, every rise and dip in the land. But what you don't see, what most people never see, is that the soil itself is not fixed. It's temporary. It sits there quietly, dark and rich and alive, until water gives it direction. The rain doesn't soak in fast enough. It can't. The soil can only absorb so much so quickly, and when the rain comes harder than the ground can take it, the rest begins to run. At first, it's just a thin film. Then that film gathers. It becomes a sheet of water sliding downhill, and that sheet starts to carry things with it, grains of soil, organic matter, everything that makes the ground worth farming. You don't see the first grain leave, you don't see the second, but you would see what happens next if you were standing out there in the storm. The sheet becomes a trickle, the trickle becomes a line, the line cuts deeper, a rill forms, just a small channel at first, barely noticeable, but the water doesn't stop, it keeps moving, keeps gathering, keeps cutting, and by the time the storm has settled in, that small line has turned into something else entirely. A gully, 3 feet deep in places, long enough to split a field in half, and everything that was in its path is gone. 30 years to build an inch of topsoil, one storm to take it. You won't see it happen overnight, not clearly. What you'll see is the morning after. You drive out to your field, the sky is clear again. The storm has passed like it was never there, but the ground tells a different story. Where there used to be smooth rows, there are scars. Where there used to be dark soil, there's yellow subsoil exposed beneath it, the kind that doesn't grow anything without years of work. You step out of the truck, boots sink slightly into wet ground, and you look, really look. Soil that was here yesterday isn't here anymore. It's in the ditch, in the creek, already moving toward the river, already on its way out of your life, forever. Most people think soil is permanent, that land is something you own, something stable, something that stays. But soil moves. And once it starts moving, it doesn't come back. Not in your lifetime, not in your son's, not in your grandson's. And the only thing that ever stopped it was something most farmers had already decided to remove. Before the storm, there was a decision, not made in one day, not made by one farmer, but made slowly across an entire county. The land didn't change, the hills were still there, the slopes were still there, the water still ran downhill the same way it always had. What changed was how people chose to farm it. In the early years, the fields weren't straight. They couldn't be. The rows curved with the land, following the natural shape of the hills. Contours instead of lines. Farming that worked with the slope, not against it. And cutting across those slopes, quiet, almost invisible from a distance, were terraces, low ridges of earth, nothing impressive, nothing modern, but they did one thing better than anything else ever invented. They told the water to slow down. When rain fell, the water didn't get to run freely. It hit the slope, moved a short distance, and then stopped, turned, redirected, sent sideways instead of downhill, again and again and again, breaking one long fall into smaller pieces. And because of that, the soil stayed. For decades, that was just how it was done, not because it was efficient, but because it worked. Then something new arrived, straight lines, GPS auto steer, machines that could drive themselves across a field without touching the wheel. Perfect rows, perfect spacing, perfect efficiency, if the field was straight. And that was the problem. Terraces weren't straight. They curved, they interrupted, they forced the machine to slow down, to adjust, to think. And modern farming didn't want that. Modern farming wanted speed, consistency, clean passes from one end of the field to the other. A straight field could be planted faster, covered more acres per hour, used less fuel, wasted less seed, saved time, made money. And terraces got in the way of all of it. So the math started to change. Not soil math, money math. If you removed the terraces, you gained acres, you gained speed, you gained efficiency. On paper, it made perfect sense. So the ridges came out, one by one. Fields that had followed the land for 50 years were flattened, leveled, straightened. The curves disappeared. The grass waterways were plowed under. The interruptions were erased. And what was left was a clean, open slope. Nothing in the way, nothing slowing the water, nothing telling it to turn. From the road, it looked better, neater, more modern. Rows running straight to the horizon. Machines moving faster than ever before. Everything working exactly the way it was supposed to. Until it rained. There was one farmer who didn't change. Not because he didn't understand the math. Not because he didn't see the new machines, or the straight rows, or the speed everyone else was chasing. He saw all of it. He just asked a different question. His name was Caleb Whitmore, and his fields didn't look like the others. From the road, you could tell immediately. Where every other farm had clean, straight lines stretching from one end to the other, Caleb's rows curved. They bent with the land. They broke where the terraces ran across the slope. And through the middle of his fields, cutting from hilltop to creek, were strips of grass. 30 feet wide in places, bright green against the darker soil. Land that wasn't growing corn. Land that, to everyone else, looked wasted. They talked about it at the co-op, at the elevator, at the parts counter while waiting on bearings and filters. He's farming around the past. That ground could be producing. He's giving up acres every year for dirt piles. No one called them terraces anymore. They called them obstacles. And Caleb was the guy still working around them. He'd been told to remove them more than once. Equipment dealers showed him the numbers. Faster planting speeds, cleaner GPS lines, less overlap, more acres per hour. They laid it out simple. You're losing money keeping those. And they weren't wrong. The terraces slowed everything down. Every curve meant lifting the planter, adjusting the line, wasting a little seed here, a little fertilizer there, point rows at the ends, awkward passes the GPS couldn't handle cleanly. It added up, year after year, less efficiency, less output, less profit. On paper, Caleb was behind. But Caleb never argued the numbers. He didn't say the terraces made him more money. He didn't say they were efficient. He only asked one thing. Where does the water go? Not where does it end up. Everyone knew that. It goes to the creek, then the river, then somewhere far away you'll never see. That wasn't the question. The question was, what happens on the way there? Right now, the water hits his field, runs a short distance, and then stops. It meets a terrace, turns, slows down, moves sideways instead of downhill, and by the time it leaves the field, it's lost most of its force, most of its ability to carry anything with it. But without the terraces, the water doesn't stop. It doesn't turn. It doesn't slow down. It runs straight from the top of the hill to the bottom, faster with every foot, stronger with every second, picking up everything it can carry. So Caleb kept the ridges. He kept the grass strips. He kept the curves that made his fields look outdated. He kept the inefficiency. Because he wasn't farming for the cleanest lines. He wasn't farming for the fastest pass. He wasn't farming for this year's numbers. He was farming for something else entirely. Something you couldn't see from the road. Something that didn't show up on yield maps right away. Something that only mattered when the rain came hard enough to test it. The rain started just after noon. At first, it didn't feel different. Just another summer storm. Dark clouds rolling in from the west, wind picking up across the fields. The kind of rain every farmer watches, hoping for just enough. Then the sky opened, and it didn't stop. The drops came harder, faster, not soaking rain, impact rain, the kind that hits the ground with force, the kind that doesn't ask the soil to absorb it, but overwhelms it. Within minutes, the ground was saturated, and everything after that had nowhere to go but downhill. Across the county, the water started to move. On the straight fields, there was nothing to stop it. No ridges, no breaks, no turns, just open slope from top to bottom. The water ran, and as it ran, it gathered. More water, more speed, more force, and then it started to cut. At first, small lines, barely visible, then deeper, wider, until the soil couldn't hold anymore, and the field gave way. Gullies opened across the slopes, 3 feet deep in places, cutting straight through the rows. Corn plants ripped out, roots exposed, topsoil gone, not damaged, gone. The water didn't stop to ask what it was taking. It carried everything: soil, fertilizer, seed, years of work, all of it moving together into the ditch, into the creek, out of the field forever. Across miles of farmland, the same thing happened. Fields that had been smooth the day before were torn open. Yellow subsoil exposed beneath the dark layer that used to be there. The kind that doesn't grow crops, the kind that takes years just to recover. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the storm moved on. The clouds broke, the wind settled, and the rain stopped. The next morning, the roads filled with trucks. Farmers driving out to see what was left. No one needed to say anything. You could see it from the cab. Fields that looked like they'd been hit by something violent. Scars running downhill, wide, deep, permanent. And then there was Caleb's field. The same rain had fallen there. The same 5, maybe 6 inches. The same storm. But the water didn't run the same way. It couldn't. It hit the slope, ran a short distance, and stopped. The first terrace held. Water pooled behind it, then spilled sideways, moving along the ridge instead of down the hill, slower, controlled, contained. It happened again at the next terrace, and the next, breaking the storm into pieces, taking all that force and spreading it out. By the time the water reached the bottom of the field, it wasn't tearing anything apart. It was flowing through grass, filtered, slowed, harmless. There were no gullies, no exposed subsoil, no missing rows, just wet ground and standing corn. Same rain, same storm, 2 completely different outcomes. In the days after the storm, the damage became clear. Not all at once, but slowly, field by field, hill by hill. Farmers walked their land, stood at the edge of those gullies, and tried to measure what they had lost. Some of it you could see, corn washed out, rows broken, sections of field that wouldn't be harvested that year. That was the easy part. The hard part was what you couldn't replace. Topsoil, the dark layer, the living layer, the part that holds water, nutrients, life, gone. Not moved, not damaged, gone. And once it leaves, it doesn't come back. Not next season, not with fertilizer, not with better seed. It takes decades to build and one storm to erase. Some farmers tried to fix it. They filled the gullies, leveled the scars, ran the disc across the damage, hoping to smooth it out. But smoothing a field doesn't bring back soil. The yellow subsoil stayed, dense, lifeless, holding less water, growing weaker crops year after year. At first, the difference was small, 5 bushels, 10, easy to blame on weather, on seed, on timing. But over time, it grew. 15 bushels, 20, more, and it never came back. Because the loss wasn't temporary, it was permanent. The soil that left those hills was somewhere else now. In the creek, in the river, in places where it would never grow a crop again. And the land remembered. Meanwhile, Caleb's fields didn't change. Not after the storm, not the year after, not 5 years later. His hilltops still held their soil, still held their yield, still produced the way they always had. Not because of better equipment, not because of better timing, but because the soil never left. The terraces had cost him every year. Slower planting, more complicated passes, less efficiency. Numbers that never looked as good on paper. But the soil they saved was worth more than all of it. Because the real cost wasn't what you lost this season. It was what you lost forever. Most people measure farming in acres, in bushels, in dollars per year. But the land doesn't work that way. The land works in decades, in generations, in inches of soil that take a lifetime to build. And once those inches are gone, everything that depends on them goes with them. That's the part no one sees when they remove something that slows them down. That's the part no one calculates when they chase efficiency, because efficiency works until it doesn't. Caleb still farms curved rows, still plants around terraces. The water turn instead of run. From the road, it still looks slower, less modern, less perfect, but the soil is still there, and that's the only thing that matters. Because in the end, the crop doesn't grow in straight lines, it grows in soil, and the soil stays only if something tells the water to stop.